China's new Politburo Standing Committee was introduced at the Great Hall of the People. The members are, from left, Han Sheng, Zhuang Huning, Li Zhanxiu, President Xi Jinping, Premier Li Keqiang, Wang Yang and Zhao Leji. Yinghan Guan Associated Press Beijing. The ceremony in Beijing's Great Hall of the People on Wednesday was meant to introduce the world to China's new leaders, members of an elite committee that for decades has tried to govern by consensus and sometimes has been compared to a corporate board of directors. Instead, the nationally televised event was more a display of the political power that Xi Jinping has amassed in just 5 years as president. None of the other members of the new Politburo Standing Committee could be considered equals or potential rivals. The 6 men stood stiffly in dark suits on the stage, each bowing as Mr. Xi introduced them. After reciting the names, Mr. Xi added almost offhandedly, more information about them can be found through media outlets. The debut of the new Standing Committee, the pinnacle of power in China, capped a week-long Communist Party Congress that became a celebration of Mr. Xi's one-man style of rule and his promise to lead a resurgent China to a place at the center of the world stage. Over the past 5 years, we've done the lot. Some work has been finished, some we must continue with, Mr. Xi said as his new colleagues, all men in the 60s, lined up before cameras. A new era needs a new look, and even more needs new accomplishments. For the first time in a generation, the new Standing Committee did not include a younger leader who would be groomed as heir apparent. The decision to delay anointing a successor broke with the unwritten conventions that have ensured relatively stable leadership changes since the era of Deng Xiaoping, which was beset by schisms and purges. Soldiers marching in front of the Great Hall of the People on Wednesday. Roman Philip, a European press photo agency, by setting himself up as the strongest ruler since Deng, Mr. Xi has pushed the world's newest superpower into new and potentially dangerous political territory. On Tuesday, its final day, the Congress elevated Mr. Xi, 64, to the same exalted status as the nation's founder, Mao Zedong, by enshrining Xi Jinping thought into the party's constitution. If Xi goes for broke and breaks precedent by not preparing for an orderly and peaceful succession, he is putting a target on his back and risking a backlash from other ambitious politicians, said Susan L. Shuck, the chairwoman of the 21st Century China Center at the University of California, San Diego. By taking such a risk, he shows himself to be more like Mao than we originally thought. He demonstrates his power by overturning institutions, she added. Mr. Xi's authoritarian approach was meant to bring faster policy making after years of stagnation under his predecessor, Hu Jintao. Instead, critics say, the concentration of power in one man's hands has created its own bottlenecks, with officials unsure how to execute policies or afraid to deviate from top-down demands. Such problems could worsen. Mr. Xi's accrual of power heralds a more determined push around his favored economic policy initiatives and efforts to reassert the party's role within public life, said Tom Rafferty, an analyst with the Economist Intelligence Unit. However, aggressive centralization will also bring risks. The lack of a potential successor could be seen as a sign that Mr. Xi intends to dominate beyond this next 5-year term, which ends in 2023, either by staying in office behind the scenes. Mr. Xi may also want more time to test possible successes, while avoiding lame duck status with an heir waiting in the wings. In a possible nod to concerns about Mr. Xi amassing too much power, most of the 5 new Standing Committee members were not long-time associates of his, though all have worked with him in some capacity. Premier Li Keqiang, the only holdover from the outgoing committee besides Mr. Xi, was once seen as a possible rival to lead the country. A live broadcast in a subway car in Beijing showing Mr. Xi introducing members of the Politburo Standing Committee. Mark Shiel by an Associated Press. Xi has seemingly chosen magnanimity with the list, said Christopher K. Johnson, an expert on Chinese elite politics at the Center for Strategic and International Studies in Washington. Of course, that's easy to do when you've achieved your 2 core objectives, making yourself the party's tenured ideological arbiter and refraining from signaling the succession. Mr. Xi's victory at the Congress means he will welcome President Trump to China next month more confident than ever in his hold on power and the party's support for his more assertive foreign policy. His signature initiatives to extend China's influence overseas, such as the global infrastructure program known as One Belt, One Road and a drive to build artificial islands in the disputed waters of the South China Sea, are now likely to stay unchallenged. Some China watchers have said they also expect Mr. Xi to place more emphasis on overhauling the economy and cleaning up finances, after spending the past 5 years stamping out dissent and tightening his control over the party and the military, China's other political power center. One sign was the promotion of Liu He, his closest economic advisor and a longtime advocate of curbing debt and financial hazards. As a new member of the Politburo, a broader 25-member council that is less powerful than its standing committee, Mr. Liu appears likely to wield greater influence on policy. In his remarks on Wednesday, Mr. Xi noted that next year would mark 40 years since Deng opened up China to market forces and vowed to firmly and unwaveringly deepen reform in every aspect. He wants a team around him that will implement his vision, said Evan S. Medeiros, the senior director for Asian affairs in the National Security Council in the Obama administration. On economic issues, one could tentatively say that this Politburo Standing Committee is more reform-minded than the current lineup. A conductor leading a military band during the closing ceremony of this week's Congress, the party's 19th since its founding in 1921. Yinghan Guan Associated Press. This week's Congress, the party's 19th since its establishment by Marxist revolutionaries in 1921, has portrayed Mr. Xi as a transformational leader guiding the nation into a new era of Chinese socialism. Mao unified China after nearly a century of civil war and foreign invasions. Deng brought it prosperity, and Mr. Xi is said to be restoring the nation to global strength and leadership. The Congress blessed Mr. Xi's agenda by writing his name and ideas into the party's constitution, in effect declaring any effort to challenge him to be an act of ideological heresy. Under Mao and then Deng, the party struggled with succession arrangements that ended in purges and division. Then, in steps from the 1990s onward, the party established a pattern of installing likely successors on the Standing Committee well in advance, with party leaders serving no more than 2 terms. Mr. Xi himself joined the committee in 2007, before taking power in 2012. Before him, Mr. Hu served on the committee for a decade before succeeding Jiang Zemin. The party has promoted a phalanx of officials loyal to Mr. Xi into the broader Politburo. About 2/3 of the 15 new members joining the body once worked under Mr. Xi have other long-standing ties to him, including some younger leaders seen as potential successors. They included Chen Minor, 57, who worked as a propaganda functionary with Mr. Xi when they were both officials in the eastern province of Zhejiang in the early 2000s. Some experts had speculated that Mr. Xi might attempt to catapult Mr. Chen into the current standing committee. Instead, Mr. Chen is one of 4 Politburo